Salvete omnes, and welcome back to Caesar Book 1, following the AP Latin syllabus. We are going to be continuing on here with chapters 4 through 7. In part 1 of this video, we covered chapters 1 through 3, and while I had hoped that we would cover more ground, that video got quite long as those first few chapters were a little bit detailed and required a bit of explanation, so we're just going to continue on right here. So let's refresh ourselves on what has happened. Orgetorix, the Helvetian, nobilissimus and ditissimus, a very, very noble and wealthy man by far, had convinced the Helvetii that they should migrate en masse, right, all of them, from the territory that they currently occupy because they consider it to be too small and too difficult to go and fight with their neighbors. So they should gather up all of their resources and move as one to some new territory. The Helvetii agreed with this plan, and Orgetorix used his newfound power, because the Helvetii elected him to be in charge of organizing this migration. Orgetorix used this power to form a conspiracy with Casticus from the Sequani and Dumnorix from the Aedui, two neighboring tribes, on the condition that they should work with Orgetorix to overthrow the current rulers of their tribes and seize power for themselves, ally with the Helvetii, and then they would all go on to conquer the whole of Gaul. That was Orgetorix's plan. And so here we are at the beginning of chapter 4, and we see that things are not working out well for Orgetorix because ea res. And this race right here, race is a lovely word. It's usually very broad, so we have to pay particular attention to context. And the context that we are in right now when we talk about this thing or situation or affair is that we are talking about the conspiracy. All right, so this conspiracy was, because we see est enunciata, so we know it's perfect passive, was to the Helvetii, dative, by means of informers, or an informer, reported. Okay, so somebody found out about the conspiracy and turned Orgetorix in. All right, so now here we see the consequence of that. Moribus suis, ablative, according to their custom. All right, that would be the suis, the custom of the Helvetii. Orgetorix, and notice that he is here in the accusative, Orgetorix from chains to plead his case. This expression right here, causam dicere, works as one expression. It's a technical term, and it means to go to trial, all right, in Latin. So the Helvetii coegerunt, they compelled, they forced. They forced Orgetorix to plead his case, to go to trial in chains, all right, and this just means that he would be chained while he was making his case, all right, and that was according to their custom. And then, now this bit right here is a little awkward to us English speakers because it hinges on this impersonal Latin verb oportebat, literally it was fitting or suitable or appropriate, and then most everything else happens with accusatives. All right, so damnatum here, back at the beginning of this phrase, damnatum is referring to Orgetoricum. All right, so Orgetorix. And the force of damnatum in this moment, it's technically the object of sequi, all right, because sequi is deponent, so. But the force of it, we understand something like if Orgetorix is found guilty, right? That's what damnation is. It means being found guilty. So if Orgetorix is found guilty, the punishment that would follow him, you see how that's the object of sequi? The punishment that would follow him was appropriate. So it was appropriate for a punishment to follow Orgetorix if he were condemned. And then the punishment itself is explained here in this ut clause. All right, what is the punishment? That he be cremated by fire. All right, so if he is found guilty, the appropriate punishment, according to the custom of the Helvetii, is that Orgetorix be burned alive. All right, so let's see what happens to Orgetorix. Next sentence, we start off with this ablative absolute. Die constituta. This is kind of like an ablative of time, but it's also an ablative absolute. On the day that was set down or established or decided, we would say for, these words here are both genitive, causae dictionis, which is the exact same thing as causam dicere, for pleading the case. All right, so the day of the trial, basically, is what we would say. on the day that was set up for the trial, Orgetorix to the court, right, or the judicial procedure, right? It's not a court like we might think of it, but to the judicial procedure, his entire family, all right, all of his family, and then this right here describes how many are in his family. To the number, we would say, of about 10,000 men. Literally, this homonym is genitive. It goes with the miliodecim. It's a partitive genitive. 10,000 of men. All right, that is Orgetorix's family, his whole family. Now, in case, just so we understand, we're not talking about your nuclear family or something like that. These are not necessarily people who are related to Orgetorix by blood. All right, if we understand the word familia in the Roman connotation, this would certainly include slaves, but it might just also include people, especially given the information that we get down here. It might simply include people who are indebted to Orgetorix or who effectively sort of serve him. They acknowledge him as their master in some way, right? Even if they're not strictly his slaves, they just might be, they might owe him favors, right? And that again is what we're going to see down here, all right? So regardless, his entire family, about 10,000 men from everywhere, right? Because obviously 10,000 men don't just all live in one neighborhood. From everywhere he compelled or he brought, right? So he brought his whole family to the trial, and all of his clients, and this is a very technical Roman word, the idea of a cliens. These are people who owe him favors. All of his clients and oberatosque. Now this specifically is debtors. All right, so if we distinguish the cliens from the oberati, right, the clientes from the oberati, the clientes owe Orgetorix favors or duties or obligations, and the oberatos owe him money. All right, all of his clients and debtors, of which, or of whom, he had a great number, right? So again, he's a very, very powerful, wealthy man. To the same place, eo dem, right? We see eo, which means to the place, and dem, the suffix, means the same. So to the same place he brought. All right, that is to say, to the trial. All right, so on the day of the trial, Orgetorix shows up with his entire family of 10,000 men, and on top of that, a bunch of other people who are supporting him. Let's scroll down here to see what happens. There's no and, but we can supply it. And through them, that would be all of the people that Orgetorix brought, ne causam diceret, this ne, a negative purpose clause, so that he would not have to plead his case, so that he would not go to trial. All right, what did he do? Se repuit. He escaped. Literally, he snatched himself away, but he escaped. So the purpose of bringing that massive crowd of people and supporters was to effect Orgetorix's escape from having to actually stand trial for his actions. All right, let's see how this turns out for Orgetorix. This is the end of Orgetorix. This cum we see right here is not followed by an ablative, so it's not cum meaning with, it is the clause marker cum. And we see down here conaretur, we see the subjunctive. So that means that cum could mean when or since / because or although. But in this case, it almost certainly just means when, although is not a bad translation given what happens down here, right? I mean, boom, spoilers. Orgetorix mortuus est. He's dead. He turns up dead. All right. Did he turn up dead because this happened? Probably not. Did he turn up dead when this happened? Maybe, or after this happened. Or did he turn up dead although this happened? That's why although might work in this context. So it's up to you, when or although, after or although, both are okay. I'm going to go with although here. Although the tribe, right, civitas, that's the Helvetii, by this thing, now in this case the context is Orgetorix's fleeing from trial, his escape. They were incitata, or literally the tribe was incitata, but we can understand the tribe to be plural in English. So the tribe, by this action that Orgetorix took, was incensed or enraged. With arms, this is an ablative, with arms their justice to seek they were attempting. All right, so they were going to exact justice. That's kind of what this expression means if we take these three words together. They were going to exact justice from Orgetorix. So they were going to punish him with arms. And a large number of men from the fields, the magistrates, the elected officials, were gathering. Okay, so this is basically the Helvetii are raising an armed force to go and seek Orgetorix and punish him. All right, and the armed force is what's really important there. Right, we're not playing nice anymore. Presumably Orgetorix has established his guilt by fleeing, right, we assume. But it's irrelevant because Orgetorix mortuus est. He turns up dead. And Caesar feels the need to add, neque ab est suspicio. It is not without suspicion. All right, so this is kind of a litotes, right? That neque ab est. He could have just said ad est, there was a suspicion, but this is a little more artful, right? A little more circumspect. It was not without suspicion, as the Helvetii thought. Now this ut here you see is followed by arbitranter. That's an indicative verb. So we know that this ut is not a purpose or result clause or anything like that. It's just a standard as translation for ut. As the Helvetii thought, all right, or are thinking. All right, so it is the opinion of the Helvetii that, right, here's what the suspicion was, this clause right here. We've seen quin before, we can just read it as that ipse, this is Orgetorix, that he himself, for himself, death had sought. So the Helvetii suspected that Orgetorix took his own life, perhaps in shame or in disgrace, having been caught out in his attempt to usurp power over his tribe, and also to extract alliances with people and work with them to overthrow their tribal governance as well. So rip Orgetorix, but as they say, the show must go on, because as we see, post eius mortem, after Orgetorix's death, right, eius is Orgetorix, nihilo minus, nevertheless, right, literally this phrase together, nevertheless, Helvetii id quod constituerant, the thing which they had decided, they set out to do. All right, so the Helvetii are going to attempt to do what they said they were going to do. All right, and it is worth noting right here, this facere, I have read it with conantur, but there's really no reason why you couldn't read it with quod constituerant facere. The thing that they had decided to do, they were setting out to do. That's the beautiful that's the beauty of its placement here in between these two verbs. It's really not clear which verb you should read it with, so, we just read it with both. So the Helvetii were going to set out to do the thing that they had decided to do. What is that thing? Well, here it is. That from their borders they would depart. So the migration is still on. Even though Orgetorix was conspiring and has since died, the Helvetii are too far down the path now. They've committed to it, and so they're going to see it through. They have to see it through. All right, so what happens? Well, ubi iam, now and so at that time when, right? At that time when? Se ad eam rem paratos esse arbitrati sunt. Notice the grouping of these verbs. Paratos esse is our infinitive, so we're in indirect speech, right, with se as our subject. And arbitrati sunt is just the deponent perfect tense form of arbitror. So they, for this affair, again, context, we're talking about the departure. We just mentioned it in the previous sentence. Were prepared, they thought. So when they thought they were ready for this business, that is to say the departure, what did they do? Oppida, their towns, all of their towns. All right. How many towns did they actually have? And remember, an oppidum in Latin is something like a fortified location. All right, so this would be a slightly larger settlement with walls and whatnot. About, in number, about 12. We've seen this odd with numbers before. We saw it with Orgetorix, right? And so we understand it to mean something like about or around or approaching. So in number, about 12. That's their oppida. And there's no et, but we can understand it here. This is an instance of a syndeton, right? No connectors, but we understand them. And their oikos, these are villages, oikos, about 400, all right? Because remember, the Helvetii are a very numerous people, so about 400 villages. And all the remaining private buildings incendunt. They burned. All right. So they're committed to this departure. They just burned all of their buildings. Let's scroll down and see what else they did. All of their grain. Well, I certainly hope they didn't burn this. Oh, wait, Caesar explains. Except for what? Now, praeter we know is a preposition that means apart from or except for or other than. And the quod is going with praeter quod, right? With praeter. So praeter quod, apart from what with them they were going to carry. You see the future and you see the future participle right here. Portaturi. So all the grain apart from what they were going to carry with them, they burned. All right, they burned all the grain too. Why did they do that? Well, Caesar explains, at least what he says the Helvetii's thought process was. So that, this was their purpose, so this is a purpose clause. So that, and then we see this ablative absolute, all right? The ablative part of this ablative absolute is down here with spe sublata. And then reditionis is a genitive, and domum is that standard accusative looking locative, right? To home, towards home, all right? So, and that's going with reditionis, all right? So to home, to return, hope was removed. So what does that mean? So with the hope of a return home having been taken away. So the idea is they're burning all of their buildings and all of their extra grain so that they have no hope at all of coming back. They must go forward. All right, they must go forward and see this through because there's nothing to come back to. They will have burned down everything, including the grain, and that's a big deal because you can't just plant more grain and expect it to crop up in a couple days. It takes a whole season. So the purpose in this was that paratiores, they would be more prepared, right? Notice the comparative adjective here describing the Helvetii. They would be more prepared, paratiores essent, for, all right, this expression right here is a gerundive expression. You see subeunda, that's a gerundive. And again, odd with a gerundive can express purpose. So for the purpose of undergoing, or just going through, omnia pericula, all of these dangers, right? So they have to commit to this action. They don't want any last-minute changes of heart driving them back home, so they burned everything, and that would make them more ready to face all of the dangers that had to be faced. And the last thing they did, very practical, trium mensum molita cibaria. Now this molita cibaria is kind of an interesting phrase. The note tells you it means something like grain, that's cibaria. We see kibus in there as the root word, right? Kibus. Grain that has been molita, ground. All right, so ground grain of, but we would say for, all right, enough for trium mensum. This is a genitive, for 3 months. So in English, we would almost say this backwards. We would say 3 months of ground food, but Latin does it the other way. Ground food for 3 months. All right, what about that food? For themselves, quemque, each person, this is not and, right? This is not que meaning and. This is the word quisque, which means each. Each person from home to bring. All right? So they commanded, they ordered, right? The Helvetii ordered. So the Helvetii ordered each person to bring for themselves from home. Domo is again that locative form, but here it looks like the ablative. It's placed from where, all right? The ablative locative as opposed to up here where domum was the accusative locative, all right? So the Helvetii ordered each person to bring with them from home 3 months worth of ground food, all right? And the idea being that they would scrounge or steal or pillage the rest or buy as they needed. All right, so they are ready to go. But there is still more to do. There is still more to do. We're continuing on. Persuadent, all right, still the Helvetii. They persuade, and you'll notice this whole thing identified as the object, even though, as we can see, the case is dative, right? Because persuadeo wants a dative. So they persuaded these guys, these are just tribes, the Raraki, the Tulingi, and the Latobrigi, who happen to be their finitimis, their neighbors. Ut, we've seen this before, this is the indirect command. Don't be fooled by the form here of uti, all right? This is not the verb utor in the infinitive, no. This is just an alternate form of the subordinating conjunction ut. Most of the time we see ut, just a u and a t. Sometimes, though, we can see uti, just because. All right? So what was it that they were persuading these people to do? To, all right? And then we have this little expression right here. Usi is from the verb utor, all right? It's the participle. Using the same plan, all right? This is referring to the Raraki, the Tulingi, and the Latobrigi. They should use the same plan. What's that same plan? Well, we're talking about moving to a new space, new territory, and also, committing to it in the sense that you burn everything, because that's what this ablative absolute is talking about, right? Once all of their towns and villages were burned, together with them, this is the Helvetii, this ablative with cum, with the Helvetii, together with the Helvetii, these tribes, proficiscantur, they set out. Okay, so they have allied with these three tribes and welcomed them into the fold. All right, they are going to travel with them. So the Helvetii's forces now are larger. And we're not done. Let's scroll down so we can see the whole thing. The Boii, which everyone always loves to say. The Boii, who are they? Now, these are very interesting people because these people seem to have no particular home. All right, they do live on the other side of the Rhine. All right, they live trans Rhenum, so they live on the German side of the Rhine. So again, if we're thinking about the way Caesar has portrayed the Belgae and the Helvetii, it's their proximity to the Germans that makes them so scary. The Boii live among the Germans. And they had crossed over into the lands of the Noriki. All right, this is just another tribe, into those lands, and they had been fighting the Norii. All right, they had been attacking it. They'd been attacking Noria, the land of the Noriki. All right, so the idea here is that these people had been on the German side of the Rhine, but were now sort of also seeking somewhere new to live because they had crossed over into this land and were now engaged. Notice the imperfect tense. They were engaged in fighting the Noriki. And so what the Helvetii do is they receive them to themselves as friends, literally allies, actually. This has a deeper meaning in the context, right? As allies. And they join them to themselves. All right. So again, they have absorbed now not just the Raraki, Tulingi, and Latobrigi, but also the Boii. So their numbers continue to swell, right? Everybody knows the Helvetii are leaving for, greener pastures, for lack of a better term. And so a lot of other smaller tribes are joining up with them, possibly for the protection, possibly for the potential opportunity to do a lot of pillaging and make a lot of money. All right, moving on now into the next chapter. So now we're going back to a little bit of geography because Caesar needs to explain how the Helvetii could possibly get from their very constrained location where they currently are to this new land that they want to get to. So let's start off. Erant omnino itinera duo. There were in all 2 paths. All right, 2 paths. Paths by means of which, right, you notice the quibus has itinera as its antecedent, but then is also reinforced with itineribus. This is a fairly common pattern in Latin, and in Caesar, he likes it. So we don't need to say it twice. We can just say, there were in all 2 paths by which the Helvetii could leave their home. All right, we don't need to repeat the itineribus. One, now this is the iter, this is unum iter because iter is neuter, all right? One path, and we can just understand the est or the erat, is through the territory of the Sequani, all right? But we see that it is angustum et difficile. It is narrow and difficult. All right. It goes between, still the path through the Sequani, between the Ural Mountains and the River Rhone. All right. And then this expression right here, this little relative clause, which hinges on the qua, on it or through it or on this road, on this path, scarcely a single cart could be led. So the idea here is that the road that this path takes them on is so narrow that they would have to go in single file, singuli carri, in single file, one cart at a time. That's a very, very bad thing. All right, especially if you're afraid of being attacked. Okay, having scrolled down here, let's continue on with the other problems this path has. Furthermore, or autem, right, also, mons altissimus. So an extremely tall, a very, very tall mountain, impendebat. This means something like overhangs or towers above, something like, all right, something like that. So a very, very tall mountain towers above them, or above the path, so that, right, now this is a result clause that is triggered by the superlative altissimus, all right? The idea here is that the mountain is so tall that, that's how the ut pops in, that easily a very small number of people, per pauci, could stop them, could hinder them. Okay, so just like the Spartans at Thermopylae, a very, very small number of soldiers in a narrow ravine can thwart a much, much larger force attempting to pass through. So that's the concern there. So this is one way that the Helvetii can go, but it's clearly not ideal, or at least the way the Helvetii/Caesar are presenting it. Let's go down now and look at the other path. We see it right there, alterum. Let's scroll down so we can see the whole thing. Alterum, the other path, per provinciam nostram, goes through our province. And we've talked about what this means. The Roman province in Gaul, the only one they currently have. Multo facilius atque expeditius. Notice the comparative adjectives for alterum. Much easier and, again, more open, right? Expeditius, all right? More open. So literally it would be something much easier and easier. Easier and less troublesome. All right. Why? Propter ea quod, on account of the fact that, or because, inter fines Helvetiorum et Allabrogum, between the borders of the Helvetii and the Allobroges, another tribe that are going to be important. And then Caesar throws this little nugget in. The Allobroges qui nuper pacati erant, who recently had been pacified. Now, what does that mean? Well, it means that the Allobroges had recently risen up against the Romans a little bit. They'd fought a little bit of a war against the Romans, and so they had to be conquered. All right. So in recent memory, the Allobroges and the Romans had fought, and the Allobroges had lost. Okay, and that's going to be important here in a second when we come back to the Allobroges. But regardless, between their borders, the borders of these two tribes, the Helvetii and the Allobroges, the Rhodanus flowed, right? So the river Rhone flowed, and it, the river Rhone, in not no places, so in some places. This is the standard. It's split up into two words here, but it's just one word, non nullis, meaning in some, not none. In some places, so in several places, by a ford or by a place where you could walk across the river, it was crossed. All right. So the idea was that in this area, the Rhone was slow enough and shallow enough that you could ford the river. You could cross the river on foot in several places. All right. So that is a much easier and more open path that the Helvetii would like to take. All right. Then we continue on to this very important point. The furthest town of the Allobroges, we'll hold this est for half a second in our mind, and the closest town to the Helvetii's borders, or to the land of the Helvetii, to the Helvetii's territory, is Geneva, or Genawa, if we like. All right, so this is important, all right, because this town right here is the one that is where the Allobroges and the Helvetii meet, basically. And then in the next sentence, we learn another very important thing about Geneva. From this town, a bridge to the Helvetii extended. So not only is the town the point where the Helvetii and the Allobroge territory come together, but there's also a bridge, which would be much preferable to trying to cross the river on foot through a ford. Okay, so the last part of the Helvetii's plan includes the Allobrogibus, and we see that the Allobrogibus are indicated as the object, even though they are in the dative case with this ibus. And why is that? Well, there it is, persuasuros, persuadeo again. So the Helvetii, with regard to the Allobroges, were either, notice the future participle right here, and also the esse is missing for this future participle, which is actually a future infinitive, and this future infinitive. All right, and that is a very, very common thing. As you read more Caesar, you will get used to words like esse simply being omitted because they're not required. So the Helvetii figured, that exists in Mabans, we'll come there in a second, that they would either persuade the Allobroges, all right, and this has to do with letting them through their territory. They would either persuade the Allobroges. Now, why did they think that they could possibly persuade the Allobroges to help them? Well, because not in a good attitude towards the Roman people did they seem. So the subject of we to enter here is the Allobroges. It's understood. The Allobroges did not yet really seem like they were with a good attitude towards the Roman people. Because remember, that goes back to the mention Caesar had just made about how they had recently been peccati. All right? They had recently been conquered by the Romans. So the Helvetii are thinking that perhaps, well, maybe the Allobroges aren't really friendly towards the Romans right now, not in a good spirit towards the Romans. So maybe we can persuade them to help us. They thought, they were thinking, the Helvetii were thinking. Or, right, option 2, with force, they would compel them, right? Say still the subject. They would compel the Allobroges to, all right, and this is the purpose clause, to, through their borders, the Helvetians to go allow, right? So that they would allow the Helvetians to travel through their territory. All right, because regardless of which way they go, if they come this way, this second path, which is easier, they're going to have to travel at least some of the way through the territory of the Allobroges. So the question is, do we try to persuade the Allobroges to help, or do we force our way through? All right, regardless of what's coming, omnibus rebus ad profectionem comparatis, the ablative absolute, everything for the departure was ready. They set a day. Diem dicunt. They set a day. Literally, they spoke a day, but they established a day on which day, we've seen this before, diem qua die, right? We saw that with the itinera quibus itineribus. On that day, at the banks of the river Rhone, everyone, that is to say all of their people who are going on this trip, would gather. This day was the 5th day before the calends of April, that would be March 28th, in the year when Piso and Gabinius were the consuls. That would be 58 BC. So we have now come up to the present day when Caesar is the governor of Gaul, and this is the plan that the Helvetii have. All right, so now in the final chapter, let's see what happens. Caesar only now comes into our narrative. And he enters as a dative, but as the first word of the sentence, because he is the most important thing, right? So this cum here we see is not cum meaning with, it is cum meaning when, most likely, given the context. So when this thing was announced to Caesar, right? When this thing was announced to Caesar, that is to say, this bit right here, right? What was the announcement made to Caesar? That they, this is the Helvetii, through our province, were trying to make a journey, right? They were attempting to journey through our province, because just like having to travel through the territory of the Allobroges, if the Helvetii take this simpler, easier path, they're going to have to travel through some of the territory controlled by the Romans. So what did Caesar do when this was announced? He hurried to depart from the city to depart. Now, most of the time, in fact, almost always when we're reading Latin and we hear reference to the city, Urbs, we are talking about Rome. But we do need to remember that Caesar was a governor at this point. He was a proconsul. So he was forbidden by law from actually being in Rome. All right, that's what got him into trouble later on when he did that whole Rubicon thing, right? He actually crossed into the territory of Italy where he was legally forbidden from stepping while still a proconsul. So in this context, actually, he's not in Rome, but he's near. He's as close to Rome as he can be. But regardless, it's time to leave. So he hastens to depart from the city, and here's this quam maximis again that we've seen before, right? The greatest possible, only this time Caesar included the potest. We do not need to translate this potest in our translation as he could or anything like that. We can just say the greatest marches possible. It's fine, all right? By means of the greatest marches possible, and by greatest we mean fastest, longest, all right? He was pushing his men to travel the most number of miles per day that they could, not stopping for anything except necessities. By the greatest journeys possible into further Gaul, and this is just a territorial distinction. There's further Gaul and nearer Gaul, Transalpine Gaul, Cisalpine Gaul. He marched, right? So into his territory, he marched, and he came to Geneva. All right, so we can already see Caesar has this trademark simple style where once something happens, all the events unfold very, very cleanly and very, very quickly. He hurried from the city, he came to his province, and he went to Geneva. In keeping with the quick and decisive action, for the entire province, the greatest number of soldiers possible, we see the same quam maximum potest that we just saw, right? He commanded, all right? So this is the idea here. The idea of commanded here is something like he sent out an order that soldiers should gather. All right, so he ordered up more soldiers. How many more soldiers? The greatest number possible. Quam maximum numerum potest. Militum, of course, is genitive, the number of soldiers. Why did he do this? Erat omnino in Gallio Teriore legio una. There was in all of further Gaul, so in the whole province, only one legion. All right? And fun fact, this legion was the 10th legion, which would come to be Caesar's favorite legion. So here's the start of a great friendship that's going to stretch over the next several years. And, moving on, and the bridge, right, which was going towards Geneva, which was at Geneva, that bridge that was so important, he ordered it taken apart. All right, he ordered it taken down. Okay, well, now things are going to get interesting. Now Caesar and the Helvetii are going to clash for the first time, in a way. Ubi, when de eus adventu, now this eus here is Caesar, all right? So about his arrival, so concerning Caesar's arrival, the Helvetii certiores facti sunt. This is an expression that we'll see a lot as you read Caesar. Literally, more certain they became. That's literally what it means. But in context and in understanding, it essentially just means when they were sure or more sure that of Caesar's arrival. So when the Helvetii, made sure or learned of Caesar's arrival, what did they do? Legates to him they sent. So they sent ambassadors to Caesar. These ambassadors, legatos, were nobilissimos. They were some of the most noble or well-born or important men of the tribe. Civitatis is genitive. All right. Cuius legationes, all right, referring to the whole thing, the whole delegation. Of this delegation, Nemeus and Veracloetius held the leadership, right? Literally the first position, but the leadership. So these two men, Nemeus and Veracloetius, were in charge of the delegation. Scroll down to see the rest. Qui, now this qui does refer to Nemeus and Veracloetius. qui diceret. Now, this expression right here is basically functioning kind of like a purpose clause. These men were going to say the following, all right? They were going to say to Caesar, all right, that, so we're already into indirect statement here, that there was for them in their mind. So this whole expression right here, esse in animo sibi, right, sibi esse in animo, means quite simply they intended. It was in mind for them. All right? This is what the Helvetii intend. And this sibi, by the way, technically it should refer to Nemeus and Veracloetius because that's how reflexives work, but in context we understand it refers to the Helvetii as a group. So, they intended with no ill will or bad action, literally malefacio, right? Maleficio, with no bad action to journey through the province because, proptere quod, because another journey they had none. They had no other path that they could take. Well, now that's interesting in and of itself because we, as the readers, know full well that there is another path they could take. But this is what they are saying, dicerent, to Caesar. There's no other way we can go. And so they asked, there's a say missing here as the subject of rogare. They asked that, all right, and this is the purpose clause / indirect command, but given the context, it's, not so much a command, it's just what they want. They asked that with his permission. That's what voluntas means, right? Technically, it means something like will or desire, but in the context here, we're talking about with Caesar's permission. They ask that it be allowed for them to do this thing. That is to say, id facere is iter facere. All right? That it be allowed for them to make this journey. Liceat is a impersonal verb. All right? It is permitted. So that's why the dative sibi is there. All right? So that is their request of Caesar. Their request is that they be permitted to do this with his permission. Well, let's see what happens. Caesar, Caesar, and then we go into this whole thing, and we can skip ahead and see, oh, non putabat, But first we get the explanation. Quod memoria tenebat. Now this memoria is ablative, and this expression, to hold in mind, simply means to remember. So because Caesar remembered that, you'll notice that there's no essays on any of these participles, right, which are actually infinitives in the indirect statement. He remembered that Lucius Cassius, the consul, had been killed, and his army, eius exercitum, his army by the Helvetii had been defeated, and under the yoke had been sent. Right, his army, this is the army. His army had been sent under the yoke. So this is referring to an historical incident in 107 BC when two German tribes, the Cimbri and the Teutones, were invading, well, they were rampaging through northern Gaul and looked to be en route to invade Italy. The Romans sent a number of armies north to try to stop them, and they were all defeated until Gaius Marius, the famous ancestor of Caesar, raised an army and stopped them. Cassius was one of the consuls who led an army against the Cimbri and the Teutones, who were allied with the Helvetii. That's how the Helvetii fit into this story. And Cassius was destroyed. Right? Cassius was killed, and his army was not only defeated, but sub jugum missum, sent under the yoke. This refers to a ceremony whereby the defeated army would be forced to walk through some spears that were set up. And the purpose of it was to indicate that the Roman army, or the opposing army, had been thoroughly defeated and surrendered. All right? It was a form of shaming the losing army. All right? So this was a very, very kind of raw experience in the Roman psyche. It would be kind of like something today might be saying that, oh, well, I don't trust so-and-so because, They were involved with the surprise attack on Pearl Harbor, right? If we're thinking about how long ago in time that was, 50 years ago, all right? This event occurred in 107 BC. It's 58 BC now, right? 50 years have passed, but Caesar still remembers, right? The Romans still remember. This was a very, very shocking moment in Roman history. And so on account of this, because Caesar remembered all this, to concede this, concedendum esse, there's another esse missing, right? Caesar did not think that this should be permitted, is what this all boils down to. Caesar did not think that this should be permitted. Okay, let's scroll down here so we can see the rest. Nor, we can jump to the existent mabat, did Caesar think, because the rest of this is an indirect statement, that people with literally an evil mind or an unfriendly mind, so with ill intent, okay, so that this would be, of course, the Helvetii in Caesar's way of thinking. Then we have this ablative absolute, with an opportunity having been given through the province of making a journey. So let's break this down here a little bit. This faciundi, this word right here, is a gerundive that is triggered by facultate, all right? And it takes itinerus with it as kind of an object, all right? So an opportunity of making a journey through the province. If that opportunity was given, Caesar did not think that these people would, temperaturos, another future participle, would refrain or would hold themselves back from outrage. Not really, it doesn't really mean injury in that sense. It means outrage and evil doing. So Caesar's attitude is, these are people who have an inimico animo. They're not very friendly. They're going to engage in the sort of bad behavior they specifically said they weren't going to. But Caesar has a problem, and this is how he solves it. Tamen, however, ut spatium intercedere posset, so that, right, another purpose clause, so that a space, and this, by the way, is like a spatium temporis, a space of time, so that a pause could fall between, right? So that a break could occur, is what we might say in English, a break of time. Doom, while, or even, see this doom is showing up here with the convenierent, which is subjunctive. So for this doom, we don't need to say while, we could say until, which makes much better sense. All right. Caesar needed a space of time to pass until the soldiers which he had ordered arrived. All right. Kind of sounds like when you translate it that way, like he's getting them off of Amazon. Right. The soldiers that he had commanded would show up because he needs those troops. All right. So let's scroll down to see what he does. He responds to the legates, notice the dative, indirect object. He responds to the delegation that, we're back into indirect speech, notice once again, there's no essay, right? That he would choose a day, or set up a day, ad deliberandum, to consider this, right? This is that same ad with a gerund, right, being used for a purpose clause, for a purpose type expression. To discuss the matter. All right, so Caesar would set a day to discuss the matter, and we can understand if they, this is the Helvetii, if they wanted anything, right, from Caesar, right, if they wanted something, they should return on the Ides of April. All right, so remember, the Helvetii had gathered on the 5th day before the calends of April. So we're talking about essentially a space of a couple of weeks to allow for the soldiers that Caesar is expecting to show up. Because without them, he's going to have a very, very hard time holding back the hundreds of thousands of Helvetians who are and other people who are attempting to migrate through the Roman province. All right, and that is it for the Latin portion. This was the end of chapter 7. So that is the end of the required Latin readings in Caesar Book 1, following the AP syllabus. Maximus gratias vobis omnibus for sticking it out to the end. It's a very in-depth series of chapters, but there's a lot of political and historical background going on that we need to help clarify. So I hope these were useful to you, and we will be continuing on with Book 1 in English before moving on to Books 4, 5, and 6. So, gratias vobis and valete.